everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk all about hollow-bodied frogs, probably one of my favorite ways to catch a bass. And I'm going to give you some advanced tips on how to modify these things to help you catch more fish and get more bites. All right, so when I'm talking about frog fishing, I break it down into two different categories. I got my open water frog fishing and I have grass matted vegetation frog fishing. Two are very, very distinct, different frogs that I'm reaching for depending on those situations. And that's really, when I open up my box, I got basically two separate bins, one for matted frogs and one for open frog fishing. So we're gonna dive into open water frog fishing first. It's very simple. I don't do a whole lot of modifications for open water frog fishing, but it does help. So we're gonna dive into that right now. This is a brand new frog straight out of the pack. Throw whatever frog that you have confidence in. I use all kinds of different brands, but this one's straight out of the pack. And as you can see, they got these super long legs on them. You know, the first thing that I like to do is take a pair of scissors and I'm gonna guesstimate. I typically run my legs on my frog a little bit shorter than most, but here's the key. I'm gonna cut this at an angle. So if you can almost zoom in on this, I'm gonna have this cut here and here. And the direction and angle that you cut these frog legs is important because I feel like it helps the frog walk better. So I'm gonna it's almost like cutting a jig skirt in a way. You kind of wanna feather it. We're kind of being a hairdresser right now. So I'm gonna kind of just feather. Now you can see how it's tapered like that. That's a big deal. So I'm gonna do the other side. Now when I do the other side, I'm gonna either make it shorter or longer than what I have on this side. I always want one side longer than the other. The reason for that is it helps that frog really walk in place. So I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna trim this side a little bit shorter, and you can always trim off more. So I'm gonna just kind of feather this up a little bit, but you can see one is quite a bit shorter than the other, okay? You can kind of thin those out on the ends, but that's gonna really it's gonna let those legs flare out more. Instead of being all grouped up into one, they're gonna flare out. It's gonna help that frog walk a lot better. So that's really, really simple modification. Nothing new. A lot of you probably have heard of that. For open water frog fishing, that's ideal. Next, I'll always bend my hooks out. Now these hooks, you can see they're almost buried against the body of the frog. Real simple to do. Get you a good set of pliers and bend those out. I kick the body out. So all this is gonna do is kind of point those hooks up more, so they're angled up just a little bit. And I'm fishing in open water, laydowns and stuff like that. I'm not typically fishing around stuff that's gonna snag it up. So I'm gonna go kind of to the extreme side of opening that hook up. And all that's gonna do is help my hookup ratio when them fish get it, because the further them hook points are pointed down, the less likely are to hook up with them compared to when they're pointing up. You're gonna, be able to snag those hook points. So that's the other key to an open water frog, is being able to open those hooks up. Next, I always take super glue, and I like this insert, the weight that's on the bottom. I always like to super glue this in. The reason is, if you catch a couple fish on it, you're gonna eventually, that's gonna end up popping out. And what I found is it always pops out roughly about the time that you need to catch a fish, or you just missed a fish and when you set the hook and missed it, that thing popped out. And now that's making that frog unusable for that next cast to go back to catch that fish. So I always take a little bit of super glue and I'll super glue that weight in so you're not losing it. When you see it coming loose, just apply a little bit of super glue to it. A little bit goes a long ways, but that'll kind of keep you from losing that bottom weight in those, very, very needful times to catch a fish. Trust me, I've had to live through that. The next thing about this type of frog for open water fishing, I typically don't add any type of rattles to it, just for the sake of, I feel like the frog is enough. It's making enough commotion the way that it is. Now, if I do add something to it, I'm gonna add a glass rattle. I feel like it's gonna add the most amount of sound or unique sound in a way. I don't want to add weight to it necessarily because I really need that action in the open water. So adding a glass rattle, if you feel like it's a little bit dirtier water or something like that, or you need something different, I prefer a glass rattle. So that's all that I do to open water frog fishing. Pretty basic stuff, but those are definitely tips that are going to help you catch more fish, put more fish in the boat. So next up, we're going to talk about matted grass fishing using a hollow-bodied frog. So we're going to take the same frog and turn it into a mat frog. All that, you know, thick cheese, the matted vegetation, and the things that I do to tune this frog so it's able to get through those mats, over those mats, so those fish know that there's something up there. So the first thing when I'm talking about matted grass fishing with a frog, I need to know how thick the mats are. Are they really thin? Are they really, really thick cheese? And when I say cheese, it's that dying algae that's on the surface of it. It's real, it's not almost slimy, but it's like dead grass, you know? So the thicker that mat is, the more I'm gonna have to do to this frog. The thinner the mat is, the less I'm gonna have to do. So let's talk first about, let's just say thin mats, okay? I'm saying thin mats being there's a lot of open holes, there's a lot of little places where you still need to work the frog through those holes and also across the mat. The first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take and cut these legs even shorter, okay? So same deal, I'm cutting them the same angle. I'm gonna trim it up this side, okay? Real short. So now what I'm doing, this may look silly, thin some of these out. So what I'm doing now is I just made this frog. This frog went from this long down to a little 2.5 inch package. So I'm making this package, this frog, that they got to come through the mat to eat. I'm making it smaller and easier for them to be able to get it. But the reason that I'm keeping a little bit of legs back here is just for the sake of when you get in those open water places, you really want to still be able to work the frog. So shortening these legs up, you know, basically just enough to be able to work the frog still is going to allow you to get through those thinner mats. And when you reach an open hole or something, you can still work the frog properly. My thing is when it gets on the mat itself, if you have a bunch of legs hanging off of it, and that fish, they are notorious for being very inaccurate when they're trying to eat a frog. So they come up back here and they push the grass mat up on the legs, it's going to actually push the frog away. So the smaller the package, the more likely they're going to be able to grab this frog or suck it down without it getting pushed by the grass around it. I've done this so many times that I finally got to the point that just shortening those legs up made my hookup ratio so much better. So that's what I like to do for thinner mats with the legs. Thinner mats as well, they can be really finicky. You can get to the point where you add a glass rattle. You can add a BB as well. Just, dropping it. You can press it right through where the hook comes through. The thing about thin mats is I don't really need a ton of weight necessarily because the mat's so thin. Those fish can detect a lot of that disturbance that's on the surface because the mat is thinner. They can almost see through it, but adding a little bit of weight, adding a little bit of sound can always help. And that's something that you really need to play around with because it can change during the day. It can change daily on what those fish want. So now we're going to go ahead, moving from thin mats to that really thick stuff. And I'm talking the thick hydrilla that's got all the cheese on it. I'm gonna take the same thing. So we already super glued the bottom previously. We trimmed the legs up for thin mats. And now for thick mats, I'm going to take this and I'm literally going to cut the legs off. Like so. I'll do this right. So I'm gonna literally cut the legs off. So exactly what we were talking about with the thin mats, making a smaller profile for them fish to be able to get so they're less likely to miss it. Now we just created a 2-inch bait. We made a smaller profile so when they're on those really thick mats, they can't tell what's up there and they have really bad aim. So now we're really helping those fish get this bait. I'm gonna take super glue now, and this is key, you're gonna wanna do this, is taking super glue and just super glue the ends of those legs. So now you're not gonna have any place that water's gonna be getting in through the legs. And so now we just super glued that. You let that dry. Along with that, the thick mats, you have to be able to get this frog to imprint the mat, to be able to really stick on it and sink down so those fish can actually detect that something's up there, because more times than not, it's bluegill that they're eating, that they're feeding on. They're coming up through the mat and blowing bluegill up, and they sit there and flicker. So that's really a lot of times what this is mimicking, is bluegill on those mats. But you gotta have it heavy enough to be able to make those fish know that it's even there. So we already put a BB in this. I'm gonna go ahead and take this glass. I like glass, and I'm gonna show you why. A glass worm rattle, you can feed it right up through where the hook comes out of the body. This is something that I like to do, is take a pair of pliers, don't cut yourself, but we're gonna find that glass rattle in there and we're gonna break it. There it was. Sound is totally different. You have so much more. I'm shaking it to my mic. But the sound of that, when you break that glass, so now you got a bunch of broken glass in there, we have a BB in there, and you can really hear the sound difference. On top of all of that, this is something that I learned from Alex Davis on a Wired to Fish video. So it's not new. I didn't come up with this on my own, but this is a small jingle bell. So you can hear the sound that makes. So we're gonna put a jingle bell in there as well that you can pick up off Amazon or a craft store or whatever. The key is having it small. You don't wanna have a lot of big stuff in there, because overall you don't want to impede how much this body can get crushed. So if you put too much stuff or too big of things, and now you're limiting how much gap, how much bite these hooks have, and that's a problem. So really, we didn't change hardly any of that at all, because a lot of that stuff, the glass rattle got crushed, a BB and a jingle bell. So now we got a lot of sound, and there's a lot more weight to this frog now. And that weight is gonna let you hit the mat, they're gonna be able to detect it, and it's gonna really sink in that mat. It's gonna create a lot of disturbance, and they're really gonna know. And the thing that I like about when you put this much noise on thicker mats, you can really put this in one spot and shake it a lot. And just moving this frog a little bit is creating a lot of disturbance without moving it very far. So you're shaking it, you're not pulling it very far. So if you had a fish come up and miss it, you can go back with this and just do a lot of, you can move it a foot in like 2 minutes, and you're still creating a lot of noise, a lot of sound that really agitates those fish to coming up and finally eating this thing. And if you need more weight, you can always add another BB. I've even gone as far as putting in a very, very small tungsten weight. I don't even know the weight size of that. As small as you can get. The cool thing about the tungsten is it makes a unique sound. So again, we're coming up with something that sounds a little bit different than everyone else. So you could put that tungsten in there as well. So now you created a heavier frog, and all of this is just to be able to get those fish to know that it's there. One thing that I do want to point out is when you're fishing the heavier mats, unlike the open water frog where I have the hook points up, I'd probably rotate those just a little bit in, because the more you have them up, they're going to snag that grass. That's going to really foul up your cast, not make you efficient. So you're going to kind of back those down. You're going to bend them out, but just don't have them bent out as far as what you would for your open water frog. So as far as colors go, I don't get too carried away with it. When I'm fishing matted vegetation, I typically am throwing a black frog or a brown frog. Sometimes I'll mix in a yellow, but it's really depending on the situation. A lot of times they're keying on bluegill 9 times out of 10. So I want something dark that they can see, that really mimics the bluegill that they're chasing out there. And if it's a shad spawn, open water fishing, white, you can't go wrong with a white frog. So don't get too caught up with the colors, because more times than not, it's not the color that you're throwing, it's where you're throwing the frog and how the action is of the frog. So keep it simple: black, brown, yellow, or white. Those are pretty much if you open up my frog box, those are the 4 colors that you're gonna find. 90% of the time it's either black frog or a white frog, given the situation. I've used basically the same frogging setup for years now. I use an Abu Garcia Fantasista Premier 7.3 heavy rod. I use that for open water fishing and for mat fishing. 8-to-1 Abu Garcia ALF reel, and I also have that paired up with 50-pound X5 braid or 65-pound X5 braid. The reason why I switch, you're nicking your line a lot. I would much rather have 65-pound braid, so when you're pulling and yanking on something, even if you have weak spots in it, it's more than likely not gonna break. And the reason why I go to 50 is because I can put more line on my spool, because we'll literally get into places where there's big grass flats, a lot of mats, and I'll cast the entire spool off. And I'm to the point now we can do it pretty accurately. On a full cast, I can land that thing within where that fish blew up, because that's part of grass fishing. You'll see them come up, you know, blow up through the mat. If you can get there in time and put your frog on them, you have a really good chance at catching them. So you know, being able to make that really long cast is critical. And the rest of the time I'm fishing 65-pound braid. If I'm not having to make as long of casts, the vegetation isn't as long, it's short pockets, stuff like that, I'm gonna get away with 65-pound braid. A lot of times I'll have a couple different setups on the deck, one with 50, one with 65, just for those different scenarios. But yes, please leave some comments below if you feel like any of this helped you. If you have any questions, I'll try to get to all of you. I appreciate you guys watching. Be sure to try to get out and use these frog tips this fall. It's that time of the year to catch them on top water on a frog right now. Can be really, really fun and exciting. So please, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. We're gonna be doing more videos just like this, along with the 24/7 series. So I appreciate all you guys for watching. Stay tuned.